Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous, bienvenido a todos. Thank you for joining us. A very warm welcome to all of you. I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Isabelle Ramdoo. I'm the Deputy Director of IGF. For those of you who do not know IGF, we are the largest intergovernmental forum that focuses on mining, minerals, and metals for sustainable development. Our aim is to support our member governments in optimizing the benefits of their mineral resources and in limiting the negative impacts where those arise. We currently have a membership of 79 countries. The theme of our discussion today is New Tech, New Deal, Findings and New Directions for a Changing Face of the Mine. We will briefly take you through the findings of a new research that we're very pleased to launch today. This will be followed by a conversation with three practitioners on three critical issues, namely the future of work, artisanal and small-scale mining, and community resilience. I'll introduce the speakers shortly. And this report is available on our website currently in English. You also have executive summaries in French, and you can download it. But before we get into the core of our discussions, I have the great pleasure of having with me today to welcome you Lisa Stellner, advisor in the Extractives for Development program of GIZ. I would like to thank her and GIZ because this research would not have been made possible without the financial contribution of GIZ and of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. This event, today we will present the outcomes of a two-year project. The IGF, in partnership with Columbia Center for Sustainable Investment and Mining Shared Value and Engineers Without Borders, has been looking at various facets of technologies in the mining sector over the last 2 years. Last year, we produced a tech impact review that mapped out those different technologies. And this year's research focused on implications for various stakeholders, and in particular, what kind of directions various stakeholders are taking in the face of change. In a few minutes, Aaron, Cosbey, and myself will provide you with a flavor of the report before going into the conversation part, and we'll be joined by Nicky Black, Director of the Social and Economic Development Program of ICMM. Thanks for joining, Nicky. She will be discussing with Aaron on how new technologies are changing the nature of work in the mine and how best industry, communities, and governments can prepare for those changes. Then I will have the pleasure of discussing with Dr. Moïse Ouedraogo, Director General of Sectoral Studies and Statistics at the Ministry of Mine and Quarries of Burkina Faso. We will talk about how technological changes are impacting the ASM sector. And last but not least, my colleague Jacqueline Takiri will discuss with Ángela Oblasser, Sustainable Director of Fundación Chile. They will talk about a concrete project in Chile that is providing technological solutions to local communities. But first, Lisa, let me hand over to you for a few words.
Thank you, Isabelle. So ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, dear Isabelle and Aaron, of course, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity today to welcome you as well to this exciting launch of the final report of the New Tech, New Deal project. As Isabelle said, I work with GIZ's project Extractives for Development on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And since we have combined the project from the very beginning, I'm very thrilled that we now have reached the stage where we finally are able to share the report findings and explore areas of future work and collaborations together with you. So why is this topic so important? As you know, not only new technologies need raw materials and therefore mining, but also the mining sector is fundamentally changing through technological innovation. And mining companies are investing in digital technologies across the value chain, from operations to procurement to sales and marketing. And that is why there's this window of opportunity to accelerate digital transformation and advance the future of work. And never before have technologies and new ways of work adopted as quickly as today. And I guess COVID-19 has only accelerated this imperative. But let me ask again, why is this topic important for the German Development Corporation? I think we have to ask ourselves, what does automation in the mining industry mean for resource-rich developing countries? what jobs are most at risk given future investments, what jobs will be created and how many, and is there maybe a mismatch between existing and needed skills, and does the answer change between the mine site and urban centers? So I think it is a fact that technological innovations are helping to make the process of extracting raw materials greener, safer, and more cost-effective. But however, the accompanying automation of the sector has also consequences for the local labor, the supplier market, including, on the one hand, reduced demand for labor, and on the other hand, increasing demands for qualifications. So are the resource-rich developing and emerging countries prepared for this? And maybe we have to think about what does it mean if mining no longer be associated with employment, local procurement, and the associated gross domestic product contributions. So promoting local value creation and economic development through the extractive sector is an important field of action for the German Development Corporation. The opportunities and challenges of new technologies for the mining sector must be identified in order to help develop actions for governments and companies that are adapted to the changes. And that is why 3 years ago, we decided to support a New Tech New Deal project to see how the mining sector can move forward to allow investments to serve as an engine for sustainable development for host countries and communities alike. And of course, to examine and highlight the policies and collaborations available to governments to address these coming changes in ways that promote sustainable development through mining. And let me say that digitization is an initiative area and characteristic of quality for the German Development Corporation. Like key objectives of Germany's digital agendas, such as the new implementation strategy shaping digitization, what it's called, directly addresses the raw materials sector. And with regards to the sustainable development goals, of course, digitization in the mining sector can contribute to a lot of them. For example, SDG 8, sustainable economic growth and decent work, or SDG 9, SDG 13 to take action to combat climate change, and of course, SDG 15, for example. So as I said, supporting partner countries in responsible implementation of and adaptation to the digital transformation is of high priority for the German Development Corporation. And we try to actively shape the discussion within our multi-stakeholder partnerships or through projects such as the Special Initiative on Training and Job Creation, and of course, through the New Tech New Deal project. So let me end by saying that what is needed for truly responsible transformation of the sector. And I think it is the need to build policies on better information. And that is what the New Tech New Deal project is about. And I also deeply want to thank Isabelle and Aaron for the great cooperation throughout the last years. And I'm now very curious about the presentation of the results and of course the subsequent discussion with the experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. You've already set the scene for what Aaron and I are going to present. And indeed, we hope that, this is not just a project, it's not just a report, it is the basis for the engagement that we're going to make with our member governments as IGF, because a number of issues that you referred to, but that also will be discussed, are part of the key pillars of the work that we do at IGF. So rest assured that this is not going to lay on a shelf somehow. So let us go now into kind of brief overview of the report, of the research. Can we have the PowerPoint, please, David? So let me start by saying, and echoing also what Lisa was saying earlier, technological innovation has played a vital role in the development of our civilization and in all aspects of our lives. Interestingly, the mining sector has been a catalyst in previous industrial revolutions, although today the industry seems to only be catching up with front runners such as ICT or financial services. This current wave of innovation is different. It is largely disruptive because it significantly alters the way mining businesses operate, which will have implications for host communities and for governments. These changes will certainly bring many new and arguably better opportunities. But as Lisa was mentioning earlier, there are also legitimate concerns because changes will impact the local social fabric, notably the labor market and direct and indirect business opportunities that revolve around mining activities. In poorer and lesser diversified economies, impact will be exacerbated by the absence of decent alternatives. Yeah, so I was saying that in lesser advanced economies, impacts will be exacerbated by the absence of decent alternatives, throwing out a balance that the traditional deal between mining companies, host governments, and communities had over many years. So the key question, therefore, is, if the mine of the future is perceived to bring less value to a community or to a host economy, what could be the elements of a new deal that bring us back to balance? So our research explores that question. We start by reviewing the nature of the coming technologies and their various impacts in areas such as employment, related skills, procurement, gender equality, fiscal arrangement, artisanal small-scale mining, amongst others. And then we assess some possible elements of that new deal, and we try to offer some suggestions that various stakeholders may together consider to restore that balance. So can I have the next slide, please, David? I'll just quickly, briefly mention what are the coming technologies that we've been considering in the report. As I mentioned, the changes that are being adopted in the mining sector includes a suite of very different technologies. This is a simplified taxonomy classified into 4 main baskets. First, we have sophisticated hardware and machines embedded with artificial intelligence meant to boost efficiency of mining operations. Here we talk about robotics, automated machinery, big data analytics, etc. Then secondly, we have some other smaller devices, connected devices, which are enablers of digitization and which provide an interface between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. These include drones, sensors, connected wearables, etc. And then thirdly, we have the network architectures and the software technologies that support the first 2 sets of technologies I mentioned. Examples include 5G architecture, Internet of Things. Their purpose is to collect, analyze, and integrate large amount of data that are shared through high connectivity to make things in real time. And finally, we have technologies that are aimed at improving mining processes, notably to address environmental challenges and improve sustainability of businesses. Examples include renewable energy sources or electric vehicles. A key observation here to make is that it's not only about individual technologies, but about their combined forces and about the fact that they augment the capabilities of human intelligence to perform sophisticated tasks faster and better. Key drivers for the acceleration in adoption of technologies include more difficult geology, declining ore deposits, the need to reverse a secular decline in productivity, the need to improve safety of mine workers, need to manage environment, etc., and more recently, imperatives to adapt to COVID crisis. Next slide, please. So what pace are those technologies, at what pace are those technologies being adopted? The latest World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs confirmed that 90% of companies surveyed are focusing on the adoption of 3 technologies, namely hardware and robotic process automation, digitization and connected wearables, and big data analysis. Overall, more than 75% of mines surveyed by that WEF report already are massively investing in the first 3 baskets that I mentioned, and close to 60% of mines surveyed are also investing in cleaner and greener processes, the 4th basket I mentioned. So all in all, saying that by 2015, this trend is going to accelerate. Next slide, please. So what impacts are we likely to see? First, we need to recognize that the magnitude of impact is very difficult to measure. As I said, we're looking at a suite of very different innovations and applications, each of which will have different types of impacts depending on the countries, on mine locations, and on stakeholders involved. In a nutshell, for the mining industry, the whole point is asset efficiency and improved productivity of operations. So impacts are expected to be largely positive on that side. But relationship with communities might become more tense if benefits such as jobs are seen to be eroding with technologies such as automation. As we know, often mining is the sole, if not the largest employer in lesser advanced economies. And even very few job losses can have ripple effects on local communities with very serious consequences, in particular in the absence of other alternatives. Ernst & Young have found that labor impact of technology are the second highest risk for mining industry if transitions are not well managed, anticipated, and prepared. But on the other hand, some new technologies can provide new, sometimes unexpected, and better opportunities for local economies and for men and women. And finally, for governments, national level socioeconomic benefits such as taxes, local content are core expectations that will be impacted in a way or another. A key consideration here is how governments will maintain the balance of benefits in their negotiations with the mining sector, and whether they are able to foster alternatives outside mining. In some cases, social tensions around impacts of technological change may have political implications, so this is very sensitive. Overall, what I can say is that impacts will depend on how transitions are anticipated and managed, and on the type of partnerships that will be established among all stakeholders, industries, communities, and the state, to strengthen resilience and to leverage positive spillovers of technologies to balance the negative impacts. So that's me. Aaron is going to take you through now some of the main takeaways on the policy side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Isabelle. And if we could go to the next slide. So in light of what Isabelle has just talked about, the question we ask next in the report is, what should governments do? It's the job of governments to ensure that exploitation of their resources leads to benefits for the country's citizens, for mining affected communities. In what ways can they pursue that job in light of the kinds of impacts that Isabelle has just summarized? So we, in the report, look at sort of 4 buckets of answers, 4 kinds of policies. The first bucket is policies that help to ensure that any job that is available in the mine of the future can be filled by locals. The second type of policy is leveraging mining for diversification, creating economic benefits outside of the mining sector in terms of diversification. This is jobs outside of mining. The third is looking at what types of tax regimes might be appropriate for the mine of the future. And the fourth looks at what types of technologies, what types of solutions might be available in the new technologies themselves to the problems, the challenges created by those technologies. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll start to run through the various, the 4 buckets, but my apologies, I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm not going to do justice to the rich treatment that's given in the report itself to these buckets. So the first bucket, employment. The easy answer to the challenge of changing job descriptions is that governments need to spend more money on education, including basic education, vocational training, retraining, upskilling. This would allow the locals that are currently employed or locals in the mining affected communities to fill the jobs of the future. But of course, that's not an easy thing to do for many mining rich countries. And so we need to say a few more words about what needs to happen in this case. The first prerequisite is baseline knowledge about what skills are needed in the mine of the future, what gaps there are in the existing education regime. The second thing that needs to be said is there's a critical need for a partnership approach. In the first instance, mining companies need to communicate with governments about what skills they will need in future, what their investment plans are, the new technologies they'll adopt. And secondly, governments need to facilitate partnerships between mining companies and educational institutes to make sure that the retraining and training that's going on actually fits the job descriptions of the mines of the future. Mining companies have a critical stake here. More so than in the past, they're going to be competing with other sectors to recruit and retain skilled workers, workers whose skills will equip them to work in other sectors as well. If we could go to the next slide. So technology as a solution to these problems themselves, we're talking here about ways in which new technologies can actually bring benefits that may increase the contribution of mining investment and mining operations to local communities, to host governments. And we think in the report about 4 different sort of ideas in this context. One is local innovation to support large-scale mining operations. So we know that most of the innovation that happens these days is done by multinational original equipment manufacturers or global tech companies, but there is a potential role for new suppliers of innovative solutions at the local level. We can talk about suppliers of new technology that tailor-make solutions specifically designed to solve local problems, or that adapt existing technology to local conditions. This kind of new supplier is possible, but will need support from governments in the way of startup financing, investment in national systems of innovation, and we go through some of those types of support. Another idea we explore is the use of large-scale mining technology to support economic diversification. And there are a number of ways we can see this happening. Maybe the best example is mining companies sharing their high-speed internet, the internet that any data-rich mine of the future will need, with local communities, because we know that access to high-speed internet can be a powerful enabler of development. When it's coupled to training and access to hardware, it can be a good tool for delivering education to remote communities. It can also be an invaluable aid to the delivery of rural healthcare through telemedicine. And we know that high-speed internet is a great enabler of entrepreneurial activities. To be effective, this kind of sharing has to be part of a broader initiative. It has to be carried out in concert with local and national governments, of course. The third idea we pursue here is the idea that mines might supply local communities with data of interest. So we know that the mine of the future will be a data-rich environment with real-time flows of information coming from sensors at all points of the operation. Some of that data might be of acute interest to local communities. And here I think, for example, of data on the stability of tailings dams, data on the quality of downstream water coming out of the mining operation. And we're going to hear some exciting examples, or an exciting example of this kind of dynamic in the session that follows, the third session. And finally, we think about how mining level data might be used to aid tax authorities. So I talked about the data-rich mine of the future. That data could be very important to tax authorities who would like to know the value and the characteristics of what's being produced. This is a challenge always for host governments in assessing the value of exports in an effort to avoid base erosion and profit shifting. It could help them better analyze the tax gap. It could help them determine audit priorities, negotiate fiscal terms. So there are a number of ways in which the technology that we see coming in mines can actually be used as a benefit to local communities, host governments. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the third bucket of ideas is leveraging mining for diversification, using mining investment as a way to create economic benefits outside of the mining sector. And here we know there's a huge suite of policies that we're well familiar with in terms of local content policies, trying to build capacity and suppliers to the mine such that we can have local entrepreneurs working, trying to increase the number of local employees occupied at the mine. This will be challenging as the total number of employees reduces, but those policies are important. There are also transition type policies to reskill and retrain workers who may lose their jobs but need to be reemployed, whether in the mining sector or outside of the mining sector. And here policies like mandated payroll contributions to social support funds like pensions and wage insurance might be helpful. And finally, there's an interesting category of action that we call a social impact investment model. Social impact investment is an investment made with the intent to generate, in the first instance, positive, measurable social and environmental impacts, but it also gives rise to sustainable economic activities that generate a financial return. So it's not, in that sense, the same as ESG or CSR efforts by mining companies. These efforts basically amount to mining companies doing regional economic development projects, a development that happens quite outside the mining sector. The best examples of this to date are highly collaborative efforts. They pull in national and local governments, they pull in mining companies, workers, local stakeholders, and other groups and agencies. Very interesting, but a very new development and something that has promise in certain contexts anyway. If we could go on to the next slide. So, and the last bucket of ideas, re-examining taxation. So the basic question here is, can increased taxes be part of the New Deal? The answer is probably yes. We can use increased taxation of mining activity to help governments direct benefits to local communities, to funding for the transition and retraining of workers. But there are some important caveats to that dynamic, that potential. First, we may not be talking about a significant and sustained flow of excess profits to mining companies when they adopt new technologies. In many cases, they're doing that just to keep up with the rest. Everybody is adopting the new technology. So this won't be like a windfall tax that is painless for mining companies. That's an important caveat. Secondly, government programs to deliver local benefits based on those increased taxes are always going to struggle to be as impactful as direct jobs in terms of the benefits to local economies. So they shouldn't be the only policy that governments pursue. This puts governments alone in charge of delivering the kinds of benefits that we've been talking about. And it misses out on the potential of collaboration, the kinds of collaborations we described earlier that harness the capabilities, the resources of mining companies as partners in the effort to try to deliver more benefits to local communities, to host governments. So if I could go to the next slide. This brings us to the end of our summary of the report, and I'm sorry if we've gone on for a while, but I recommend the document as rich. The take-home messages are disruptive changes, very disruptive, are coming and quickly. They will change the way mining is done. Governments are going to need to adapt their laws, their regulations, their institutions, their fiscal regimes with respect to mining investment in their countries. Some prerequisites for success in that task: baseline data on job impacts, on the needs of jobs going forward, and a partnership approach, working with mining companies, working with the local communities, working with workers to make sure that the solutions actually fit their needs. And finally, and it is so important to get this right. This is a development issue because we know that mining employment is a huge force for social benefit in the countries in which it takes place. It's also a social license issue. If that benefits that flow from the current model are under threat, we need to find a new deal, a new way to make this work between mining companies and host communities, host governments. So that wraps us up with our summary of the report. We're going to move now into 3 sessions, as Isabelle said, which try to pick 3 interesting areas that we see as important for future research in this area. The first, as Isabelle said, I'll be moderating, and I'm delighted to have with me Nicky Black, who's the Director for Social and Economic Development Program at ICMM. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of work. Nicky, welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. It's great to be here. And thank you to Isabelle and IGF more broadly for just hosting this conversation today. And also just to say thank you to GIZ for supporting this work. It's extremely important. And the report, I'm just delighted to see launched today. Really.
Believe me, we are delighted to see it launched as well. So Nicky, can we start by, I think most of the people on this call will know what ICMM is. Do you mind just running us through what is ICMM?
Sure. So I think the easiest way to think about it is ICMM is really the sister organization to IGF. Both of our organizations came out of a 3-year consultation process to try and understand how mining could contribute more to sustainable development, change the way it operates almost 20 years ago now. And out of that consultation, the IGF was proposed, ICMM was proposed, and a third group on bringing together civil society, and which hasn't unfortunately been realized. But what we are is we are really a collaborative initiative, a platform that brings together 28 mining companies, which represent about 1/3 of global mining, and over 30 mining associations, both national and commodity associations, to work collaboratively to strengthen mining's sustainability performance and really work to translate those finite natural resources into sustainable social progress and benefit for mining countries and communities around the world.
Very good. Before we get into the conversation, I should say that we're going to try to leave time at the end of this talk for some questions and answers with participants in this webinar. And those of you that have questions and answers, I'm sure you'll have some, can put them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them after a discussion that we'll have on the future of work. So, Nicky, I know ICMM has been thinking about the impact of new technologies and how it will change the nature of work in mining for as long as we have. And what prompted that focus on your part, and how has your thinking in this area developed up to this point?
Brilliant. So a few years ago now, in sort of 2018, the Council of CEOs asked ICMM to develop an aspirational goal that would help deliver what they saw as a needed step change in mining's contribution to communities. So they tasked us with finding a social aspirational goal. And this was really in recognition that mining has more to do. We haven't always delivered on the promise of mining for communities. And it was also a demonstration of the commitment by ICMM members to contribute to the social, economic, and institutional development of host communities and countries. So how do you go about developing a program of work that is going to be relevant on a social issue across 650 mine sites in over 50 countries? Mine sites as different and operating in context, social and economic context is different as the Mongolian desert, the Chilean Andes, or downtown Nevada. How do you construct a collaborative initiative that would deliver that kind of step change? So we talked to people. We knew we couldn't solve this ourselves, and we engaged in a consultation process. We were delighted IGF and others on this call took part in that over a period of 18 months. And really through that consultation process, asking what is the social issue mining should be focused on to deliver that step change. The issues in the New Tech New Deal project kept coming to the fore. Really early on, what was the theme was just this disruptive world that we are living in. Disruptions for full communities, disruptions from the life cycle of a mining project, which we know very well, moving towards social transition and closure and the impacts that has, from climate change, and then significant disruptions like political events, crises, or as we've seen, the global pandemic. And we identified throughout these potential areas, just skills was this critical enabler to drive a step change in the response to these challenges. And ultimately, recognize that what we're looking to understand and deliver more positive contribution to is the resilience of mining communities. So how can we support mining communities through this period of extraordinary disruption as our own operations change significantly and we work together to address these collective challenges of climate change, decent work, inequality? What came through those was a focus on community resilience with skills as this enabler. And that led us to the development of what we're calling Skills for Our Common Future. It's an initiative to support ICMM members to strengthen community and local economic resilience through accelerating national and regional efforts to build new skills or to bolster existing skills that are necessary to drive economic inclusion and diversification beyond mining. So really bringing that skills lens to the future of work and some of the other challenges identified through the New Tech New Deal work, with a real eye to, well, what does that mean for the long-term resilience of communities so they're better able to thrive through these disruptions and changes? The initiative was approved by the Council last year in December, and it sets a 15-year timeframe for delivery.
Well, it's fascinating that your analysis of the challenges is quite similar to ours. And of course, you come at it from a different perspective. As you say, we're sort of sisters in this initiative. But 15 years is a long time. We're talking about an area where there's quite a great deal of dynamic change. What Can you tell me a little bit about what ICMM is actually doing in the skills initiative at this point to try to deliver on that ambition, and how you're going to go about addressing those needs that you rightly identify?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you summed it up actually, Aaron, with your final comment, which is just there is so much we still don't know. So what we're doing in the Skills Initiative now is we are undertaking the first of what will be 4 phases of work over the 15-year life cycle or lifespan of the initiative. And this first stage is about consolidating all the knowledge and understanding what is happening in this space, what other organizations are doing to inform what and help design what this initiative will be over the following 14 years. So this kind of initial period of consolidate and build is about really getting insights, quite research heavy, understanding what the issues are, what the potential, kind of what's happening, and then what's the unique role that ICMM, representing 1/3 of the sector and really embedded in the lives of mining communities around the world, what is the unique role that we can play? So what are we doing in that? We are undertaking a number of pieces of research currently. We're looking at what the future of work means for mining and for mining communities, and we've released some of that research already. We're looking at what skills will be required. We're really trying to understand what community resilience means and what that means in mining communities, the factors that influence and underpin it, and map out what other organizations are doing. But this is not just about kind of researching in an academic library sense. It's about getting people around the table to understand what is happening now and to inform practice, even as we build the longer term design of the program. So we have dedicated working groups within the membership where members share their current approaches, learn from each other on everything from workforce development and skills training approaches to how they're undertaking regional economic development initiatives, some of which have longer lifespans than the skills initiative itself. We're working really closely with association members of ICMM, and in a way, I think they're sort of the unsung heroes of some of the work you've been highlighting, Aaron, because they're really that connecting point between individual companies and government when it comes to mapping out what skills needs are into the future and having a more coordinated response at a national level. We convene a forum of international organizations, yourselves, the World Bank, IFC, other development banks and actors working on these issues because it's changing so rapidly and we need to stay close so that we're having the most impact we can. And the final thing I say is we're trying to make as much of this thinking and good practice open as we can. So providing that to people working on it. So we're publishing the research we're doing, but we're also trying to capture the practical insights in tools and guidance available for the whole industry, because this is not just about ICMM members, it's about helping to support that step change on understanding community resilience, on responding to these challenges across the sector. So 2 bits of research, guidance we've released in the last year. One was called Building Forward Better, the Building Forward Better framework, which captured approaches to skills building, partnering, but practical responses to the COVID-19 pandemic that members were undertaking, and a real thought piece to think, how can we use this period of extraordinary disruption to build a better world, the world that we've articulated in the global goals, and the world that we will want. And the second is more recent. We've issued, and it comes back to the key thing, that key message out of the report you've done, you're releasing today, is partnering and collaboration will be so key to getting this right, and we need to get it right. And so we've released a piece of work, a tool on partnering. It's to unpack for the mining sector what partnering is as a fitness, almost a muscle. What are the capacities and capabilities that set a mining company and other organizations up to partner well? And it's got a really good checklist, really practical tool that helps companies and other organizations assess kind of how well set up am I to partner? How do my systems and processes internally, how does my culture set me up to succeed in partnering? Because we have to get better at it quickly, and it's not something that just happens. Ask anyone in a marriage.
Yes, that's true. It sounds like, as we are, you're at the beginning of a long arc of work in this area, and And you know, we're looking forward to collaborating with you going forward and watching the further products of your work. And I highly recommend to our participants the products you've already described. But maybe I could ask you, it is early days, but what kinds of, you know, are there insights from the work you've done up to this point that stand out for you? And you know, we don't have a lot of time, but if you could highlight some of the key lessons or insights you've gleaned from your extensive work in this area up to this point, I know our participants will be grateful.
Really happy to do that. And it may sound like I'm reading from the New Tech New Deal report, but that's also reassuring because what we are seeing is very much echoed in the work that you have done. I think and I've sort of got 5 things to highlight. The first is that the reskilling revolution seen in other sectors has come to mining. It's here, and COVID has accelerated it. But when we think about the workforce, whilst different companies are in different places on really kind of focused on and understanding what this means for them, mining has a playbook already to identify skills gaps and respond to them. It has done it previously, it does it all the time. And there is not, in that sense, there is not something inherently different about the task required of human resources managers or others in a company trying to do that. The challenge more is in how we're going to fill those skills, because we're identifying the need for skills that every other sector is identifying they need as well. So your point around the competition for skilled people who can help operate the mine of the future, and in some cases the mine of today, that competition is going to go through the roof. And it in some ways it presents the solution, which is this is not the mining sector's problem alone to solve. It is a problem we all need to get our hands around, which is how do we build a workforce that is technologically enabled, digital natives, etc. What it does say to mining is that there is this potentially limiting factor that people we need won't want to work for us. And they won't want to work for us if they don't think we're operating responsibly and that we're making a positive contribution. So that's the first thing. The reskilling revolution's here, but for mining, it pushes us to show that we are an attractive employer. The second thing is that it's not about digital skills. The skills gap is about getting the skills to do the jobs, but the skills gap it is also about those innately human skills. So leadership, creativity, initiative, critical thinking, persuasion, negotiation, resilience, flexibility. These uniquely human skills have been identified by all sectors as skills we need to be training for. For mining, again, that's quite, I think where it's slightly unique is those are the skills that help us secure and maintain a social license to operate. Other points, you've already highlighted them. There is a real risk that some groups will be disproportionately impacted. Women, minorities, given the types of roles that they are currently in the mining sector and their access to the reskilling opportunities or the skills development opportunities that enable their on-ramp into mining or other sectors. But I really see an opportunity in that. If we have that front of mind, the opportunity is to bring more women, to diversify mining in a way that we've not done before, because there is this collective focus on it. Next point, you've said it, we don't know what these impacts will mean or look like at a specific mine or even at a national level. Work is being done in different jurisdictions to map that, but we do know that even small changes in the direct or indirect benefit that mining can bring to a community can have, you've called them ripple effects, significant impacts. So whether this is, this will affect social license to operate for mining. And that's, again, one of the reasons we just really have to get this right. But on that point, none of this is inevitable. And I think that's where none of the negative impacts are inevitable. And I think that's where your report has such a contribution, because it helps frame practical areas of focus and a path forward for policymakers, very useful for companies and others as well. It's really through collaboration we will find our way forward. But there's no, there's no irreversible path on this. How it plays out in different mines, different jurisdictions will vary, but there are ethical, financial, political choices to be made on how we move forward. I think the final point, and you've said it already, Aaron, is just the solution to this is lifting ourselves up from the mine site to that coordinated industry development trajectory level. So what is the overall plan and path for a country to rise to the challenge of the climate transition, to rise to the challenge of new tech, New Deal, to have a vision of what the workforce they need to deliver against those challenges, and then the role mining can play in that, set against other industries, because it's really in between mining as a part of that broader ecosystem of actors that we're going to find the path forward.
Well, that was about as masterful an exposition of the nuances of this area as I've heard, and I'm glad we're recording it, because I'll go back and use that as we go forward in our future work in this area. But thank you so much for touching on a lot of the areas that, and in some depth that we didn't have time to do in the context of our summary of the report results. It really hits home. Basically, every single one of those insights hits home with us, and we couldn't, I don't think, be on a more harmonized trajectory. But so let me ask in closing. So given the analysis, the reflection you've done so far, looking ahead, what are we going to see from the skills initiative? I mean, you got 14 more years in your or something like that in your 15-year program. Yeah. What does that look like moving forward?
So this first phase comes to an end at the end of next year. So we'll have spent 2-3 years really trying to map out the territory, contributing to thinking and practice as we go. And at that point, we'll have planned to have identified the unique role that ICMM, through and with our members, can play in helping find a path forward and really catalyze the delivery of skills training programs in mining communities and countries at scale. That's what we're looking to do by the end of next year. To help us, we've got a couple of bits of research and engagement underway. One is on how to integrate these issues into corporate strategy. In short, how do you bring community resilience to the fore when there is so many competing drivers and considerations, ESG being one. And then secondly, looking more into, and you pointed to them in your presentation, what are the examples of landscape or regional approaches to try and address these challenges? What are we seeing? What's worked? Is that one path forward? Because that's a clear example of being able to scale through partnership in a place. We're also looking, we're working, and we've been working for the last almost 2 years on a measurement and reporting framework for social and economic benefit or contribution. And we're hoping to finalize that this year. It will be key to helping demonstrate delivery of the skills initiative as we move forward. And then finally, we'll continue to participate in conversations like this to support work like the work you have done at IGF through the support of GIZ, and just help us all to move forward faster, because that is the challenge. The challenge is to move forward quickly and respond to these challenges, knowing that the interventions we take now will play out over many, many years. Change, skills training, development at a regional level takes decades.
Very good. Listen, I've run far too far over time with our discussion, and haven't, as I typically do. I'm a terrible moderator. I don't know why they ask me to do these things. I haven't left enough time for a proper interactive back and forth with our participants. But we have one. Let me at least go to one question that's come in relevant to what we're talking about here. Vanessa Schaefer asks, could you mention examples of companies that are already being transparent with mining communities where they operate, talking with governments about the new tech they're going to adopt, and developing plans to address the impacts of new tech in the local labor market? Sure.
So I think a great example is in Western Australia with Rio Tinto. So they have been engaging with the Western Australian government, the national government, and working quite closely with the Mining Association to as they were considering the adoption of new technology, particularly around automated transport, but also at mine. So extensive consultation, and the response they've landed on, which I think is a great model to be considered elsewhere, is working with local tertiary education providers, with the local business associations, with the local educational institutes, with the government, to create apprenticeships and training programs for digital skills to support the on-ramp not only into mining but into other roles in that economy which are digitally enabled. So I think that's one really clear example of how one company, one of ICMM members, is really trying to tackle this issue at a local level.
Thanks for that. I think some of the, and you mentioned it, some of the really interesting examples of good work in this area are at a local level with specific companies that are trying interesting new approaches. And we're in early years. I can't wait to see how it plays out, because this is, you've said it, we've said it, it's a critical issue to get right, both for the sake of development and the benefits that are brought to local communities, for the sake of social license to operate. And obviously, we have a whole suite of issues with new technology and proposals for how to deal with it. But this is a central one. How do we approach the reskilling, the skilling of labor, such that those people that can contest for new jobs in the mines of the future are able to do so. So listen, thank you so much. That was a wonderful exposition of what ICMM is doing in this space. And I think as much as anyone, ICMM is out front on these issues. So we're going to watch with interest where you go. And of course, we'll be there with you as you go forward. Thanks again, Nicky.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass things on along now to our next session. This will be led by Isabelle Ramdoo, who we've already seen. Isabelle will be in conversation about the future of new technology and the impacts on the ASM sector with one of the authors of one of our case studies, the case studies that led into the final report. Isabelle, I'll pass it along to you for that conversation.
Thanks a lot, Aaron.
I am in charge of moderating the second part to launch the New Tech New Deal project, and this part of the seminar has to do with the operation line to contributing to the resilience of communities. Of course, new technologies can be considered as part of new questions and responses.
The question for the moment, one of the main questions is the value can mining companies contribute to the local communities with. When we started the seminar, one of our colleagues asked how we can take into account the needs of communities within the framework of the new technologies. And today we have the honor to count on Ángela Oblasser, Director of Sustainability in Chile. Ángela will share today some of the scopes of the pilot program called the TRACK program. Ángela, welcome. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the invitation. And good afternoon, everyone here. We are in several areas, so good afternoon, good day, or good evening, or good night, good evening. So to start with some questions for her, and a brief background of the project that is truly interesting, that places us in the framework of the reality of the implementation of the new technologies. And in 2018, as part of the national policy, the Ministry of Mining in Chile establishes a pilot project about a project of monitoring of reservoirs. Chile is the third country with the greatest amount, with 742, and it precisely creates a platform online that in real time creates information on the physical stability of deposit of relaves. the system, I will not provide with too much information and too much detail. Ángela is with us to tell us about all the innovative mechanisms to analyze big data and parameters. So, Ángela, I'd like to know more of this project. What is the Tranque project? What is the development of the project? So the initiative is born before 2018, before it was taken in the national, added to the national mining policy within the framework of the private-public collaboration in Chile to have a path. There is actors associated to the mining sector. We wondered what we want for the mining sector for 2030, the challenges we have to address to reach this. One of the issues that we have with the intensity in the appraisal is the tailing reservoir, that is rejection, social rejections. There are communities that want to have a deposit. So those are conflicting facilities, and they are large in extension. So there have been incidents internationally that led not only to environmental destruction, but killing of people, deaths of people. So we are in the context in 2015, and it was a limiting factor for the mining sector. Mining could not operate, so it was an important issue. From then on, some of the mining companies said, we have to find a solution to that, how we handle this social problem, what we can do. The clear answer was to start with transparency. Here, we want to be capable to share transparent information, clear information that is timely for the communities, for the stakeholders that are affected in a situation of emergency in the facilities. This idea of creating a monitoring system of early warnings. So the good thing, it was fostered from the mining sector. So initially it was Antofagasta, there was Codelco and Anglo American, and all of them said, we want to develop this. We want to develop in a private-public collaboration, because the state has to be grantor of the information that is objective, timely, and to the initiative was added the Ministry of Mining, the National Service of Geology and Mining, the National Directorate of Water, and also the organization that is in charge of the emergency handling, any kind of emergency in the country. And we have been for a long time developing the monitoring and early warning system, but the goal was to develop it along with all the users that are the mining companies and the communities. So that is a big program. We are designing the monitoring program with all these actors and stakeholders. Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's marvelous how this project starts. It's a public-private project with so many stakeholders from the government, from the industry, from the civil society, and the communities. And that is the idea within the framework of the new technologies, the efforts, isolated efforts that do not provide with the same results. It's an example how the collaboration between the different actors, stakeholders is key. Well, there is a trigger for the launch of the project. I wanted to ask you, which has been the trigger for the development of the Tranque program? We had a triggering in the beginning, and we added more in the development of the project. The first trigger was the social conflicts as inhibitors, bottlenecks, and the development of mining projects in Chile. That was the biggest concern, but that was evolving in time. So unfortunately, during the execution, there were severe international incidents, Mampoli, San Marco, Brumadinho, with fatal consequences. And this generated changes because there's always accident in the tailing deposits, and they are not decreasing. In the last decades, it was increasing, but they believe that the accidents occur in mid and small mining companies, not the big ones. And they say in the country they don't have good standards, but the latest accidents made us understand these can occur in Canada, in Brazil, associated to mining companies that are known because they have good international standards. That generated change in the perception of the company. So they said, we have challenges associated to our tailing deposit. And that the system looks for improving the operation, to have a system of managing for the company mining that starts detecting variations, small things that if we do not take care on time, it can become a bigger situation. So that is the second trigger we had. And now it is associated to a disaster that was Brumadinho, because Brumadinho, new actors raised financing companies and insurance companies of mining projects. They are concerned when an incident occurs because on one hand, they do not receive the payments on the mining companies. In the case of insurance companies, they have to be in charge of the consequences. That could be a catastrophe. So there is a new interest for sure operation that have a coordination in case of emergency. And we have the financing companies, the financing license that is relevant for the mining sector. Thank you very much. Your comment related to the problem, the key problem in mining, the tailing deposit is not a problem of developed countries or developing countries. It is a general problem. As a community, we have to look for a solution for that problem. That in that case depends for the blanket program, for example, the social impact of Tranque program. I think it is important from the point of view of collaboration, from the point of view of prevention models. I'd like to ask you how relevant has been to involve early all the stakeholders, especially the communities in the development of technology that looks for precisely improve the communication among the parties. How important has been to involve these stakeholders? Very relevant, because there is a lot of bias and assumption. I assume the communities need this information. That is their concern. So what we did in the beginning, it was the project in the territory, in the communities related in the tailing deposits of our partner mining companies. The first thing we told them about the tailing deposit, because there is an issue of balance of information and knowledge when what they understand what we mean by tailing deposit. The first thing we did was to initiate a common language, and the next thing was to know their concerns, to see regarding the tailing deposit and the information they would like to have. With this, we went back with our teams that were working in the design of the system, and we said, somehow we need to be able to satisfy these needs, to meet these needs. Maybe it is not possible to meet 100% of the needs, but we need to take care of the urgent needs and most relevant needs. Afterwards, we kept contact with the community. That is a long project, so it was a difficult process with concrete suggestions. When we had a draft, we went with the draft. We made them navigate the drafts to see how easy it was to navigate the system in a person that is used to navigate the cell phone, surf on the internet, and the person who are not used to these kinds of systems, these kinds of information. So how understandable it is the system. One of the things we did was to inform them and to see how understandable is the situation we're going to present in the system. If the message is clear or not, if um, indeed it meets the needs. So it is an loop system. They still performing. It is not finished completely, the system. So we consider it is a process, key process for the later adoption of the system on behalf of the community. I understand. So there is intervention of the communities in the framework of the initial consultation. There is a question from the participant. I don't know if we can answer if we have time. Vanessa, she asked, what is the active role of the community in this program? I mean, at the moment, if there are parameters, community parameters included in the monitoring, for example, I don't know if you can tell us about that, Ángela. The active role is that we ask them their needs. We test the system in the different stages of development. So we ensure between the need and the solution to answer to their needs, meet their needs. We try. It is a private-public project, so governance is important. It is not easy to reach to consensus. Some issues are political. When I state red emergency, that means evacuation. It is not technical because you are not certain absolutely that what is going to fail. So you need to see the events that really should deserve immediate evacuation. Those are conflictive decisions, and we implemented a governance that allows a process of decision making as a collective joint. So our initial dream was to add the communities to the governance, representative of the communities, so they participate also in these critical decisions. Unfortunately, we were not able to use the participation of the communities in the space because in the beginning there was a rejection. The position was, we don't want to have tailing deposit. So it was difficult to convince that, well, it's okay, but we need to live with many deposits, hundreds of deposits in the country, that we cannot remove them and we cannot move away from them. And we want this to be sure for everyone. It is important, your participation. And we finally motivated them to participate. That is practical, to know their needs, bring solutions in, try with them before the definite development, adjust, and try again. That is an agile development process. Very interesting, the idea. You have mentioned a key word in the process, that is governance. Ángela, it is important to speak about a transparent operation that generates confidence and minimizes conflicts among other ones. And I'd like to ask the relevance of reportability and transparency of information in the context of climate change and environmental sustainability. I think it is relevant. We are moving from a stage where there were many statements and commitments, pledges of carbon, and now we are moving from implementation stage, and somehow all the international organizations, the countries, but also the people, they want to know how we are doing in our journey, how we're going to accomplish the commitment. And they want to know on the basis of the information that is objective, transparent, and timely. It is not any information. It is not enough with a sustainability report each year. We need to see the emission, and we can see that through real time. What happened in the Tranque program is there is distrust in the information delivered by the mining companies, and the fact that that information cannot be done for all, but online as possible, generates trust because it provides with the impression that whatever is online, from the sensor to the web page, it is not able to be handled with. So it is important to create liability, to have portability systems that are online, where you technically can perform, and they have the support, the backup, as in our case, from some authority organization that generates trust, ensures its objective. Excellent, Angela. As you will say, whatever is online, somehow it is more trusted, liable. So this online platform is available for the mining companies, the communities, and the as an effort to strengthen the operation, to improve communication from the stakeholders, and somehow answer timely, properly to possible emergency in the framework of this problem that is so big regarding the tailing deposit. Ángela, with this, I'm closing the intervention, and I appreciate again for your brilliant participation. To have you here in the launching of the report has been for us an honor. We hope to continue hearing news from the Tranque program. Please feel free to share your information, the links of the chat for the people who are interested to know. They can read more on the program. And thank you very much again for your participation. With this, we move on with the second part. I will give way to Isabelle so that we see the last part. Thank you very much.
Put your questions in the chat box, and if we have enough time, we'll discuss it, or we'll discuss them at the end of the meeting if we have enough time. Now, I'd like to speak to Mr. Moïse Ouedraogo, who is with us. Mr. Moïse Ouedraogo is the General Manager of Sectoral Studies and Statistics at the Ministry of Mining and Quarries in Burkina Faso. Mr. Ouedraogo, you wrote a case study on new technologies in the mining sector in Burkina Faso. This study is included in the report, so we're going to present, and this study will be soon available in the coming days. So your study is twofold. The first part is about the industrial mines, and the second part is about craftsman artisanal mining.
We have, there are a certain number of very important factors to be taken into account to maintain the advantages for Burkina in this very complex sector. Just to remind you, according to the latest statistics, we feel that globally the number of people working in the mining sector is about 46.6 million, and including 30% of women. And this is maybe underestimated in view of the size of the informal sector and the small size of some operations. And in Burkina, the industrial sector is quite recent, dating from 2009. So this is why it's very important. This is why there's such a lot of small-scale mining. So can you please speak to us about mining, small-scale mining in Burkina? What changes have you seen in recent years? Are the techniques that we've talked about with professional mining also used by informal miners? Good evening to all the participants. As Isabelle said, I'm Moïse Ouedraogo, and I'm in charge of statistical studies and surveys in the mining sector, but I also work in an industrial mining company. So what's important here to define together is what's happening on a national level. There's trying to define the informal mining sector as we define it as all of the operations which consist of extracting and concentrating minerals and using traditional manual procedures. And so it's not based on finding a particular mine deposit. So in terms of informal mining, we only use manual traditional processes, no mechanical operations. And so having said this, we must say that the informal mining sector is a very large sector in the economy in our country and concerns a large amount of the population, especially in recent years. If we look at the number of sites, if we look at a map mapping that was carried out in 2018, there are many, they talk about 2,000 sites because there are many wildcat sites, and there are over 2 million people who live directly or indirectly from informal mining. And according to a survey carried out by the National Statistics and Demographic Institute, the annual production is about 9.5 tons. But according to other sources, the production is about 20 tons of gold per year. So this is a very large amount. So if we consider the lower hypothesis of 9.5 tons, that's 300 billion CFA francs that are distributed throughout our villages and towns thanks to informal mining. So it's about 450 million euros that are distributed every year throughout our towns and countryside. So if we compare this with the transfers from the government to the localities, this is a higher amount than the amount received from the government. So this is the sector where women play a major part in the mining industry, and quite a large percentage of jobs are occupied by women, but in the informal sector, it's much higher. Isabelle was talking about 30%. I think in Burkina, it would probably be a bit more, because there are large sections of the value chain in mining operations that are occupied by women. So it's a sector that employs many young people and many women, and it contributes to improving the living conditions in our towns and countryside. So this is why we've decided to develop a framework and set up an agency to govern it in 2018. So what are the changes that we've observed? We must say that the changes have been across the entire chain of informal mining in terms of research and mining. Informal mining research is based on empirical knowledge and instinctive know-how, intuitive know-how. It's often, and then there are people who are considered initiates, but these days they also use metal detector systems, and there are people who are specialized in using metal detector systems. So this has created another group of workers in the informal mining sector. They're experts, prospecting experts. And these young people are involved in using digital systems. And so this is where there's been the greatest change, because today, when you come to an informal mining site, it doesn't look informal at all, because you'll see that they use machine tools like digging materials, compressors. They use bulldozers for earth moving, and the motorized equipment. They even use compressors for ventilation and aeration in the mines. So when you see these mines, it's no longer the informal mines as was defined previously, but it's more a small mine. It's a small scale industrial mine. So this change in terms of mechanization provides a favorable situation for transferring some technologies from the large scale mining sector. And it's also technology, the existence for these mines is also useful, and the existence of quarries because there is equipment and available at preferential prices. And they can obtain equipment that's no longer used in an industrial mining site, and they can use it in their local operations. And so there's been a creation of new jobs in mining operations, which can lead to technological changes in these mines. These small mines may provide a jumping off point for developing employees who will then move into industrial mining. So the processes of excavation, earth moving, etc., they're the same in both cases. So we start by the breaking down of the ore, and they mainly use hammers, and this is a task that requires a lot of patience and hard work, and this is why women are dominant in here, because women are considered to be patient. So after the breaking process, then the motor taxis, taxi motorbikes take the ore to the other processing plant, and they use various types of equipment that are imported by national equipment suppliers. And despite the hardships of this work, women are not happy with the introduction of technologies, because each woman would earn 5 to 6 euros per day breaking up the ore, and this enables them to provide for their families on a daily basis. So we also have crushing is the next process, and this was also traditionally carried out by women using manual equipment, but we see that today this is becoming an increasingly masculine task with the introduction of machinery. So after crushing, you have washing or rinsing, and this is carried out in the rinsing buildings, and this is once again a feminine, a woman's activity. So I was saying that after the crushing, there's rinsing and washing, which is carried out in buildings, and this is mainly a woman's activity. And we're seeing gradual introduction of centrifuges, and women are worried about the introduction of this technology, because a single machine that can take one single machine can replace 20 to 30 employees. So it's a risk of losing for women of losing their jobs. And so then the head of the village, the chief of the village told us that the use of the centrifuge is highly profitable, but he wonders what the women are going to do when they no longer have this work to do. So to summarize, informal mining operations are a large part of our mining industry, and it improves the living conditions of many members of the community. And so while mechanization will improve productivity and profitability, and also improve the health of the operators. So that's the answer to the first question. Thank you very much. You've raised some very interesting points, and including for us the issue of gender. I would like to continue on this before we get to the second question, because there's something that comes from out of your presentation, is that unlike what we may think, that new technologies, because they will make the work less hard, could promote employment for women. But I have the impression from listening to you that in the informal mining sector, or the small scale gold mining sector, this is not necessarily the case. On the contrary, it's likely to be to the detriment of women's employment, because certain phases in the operations are mainly carried out by women, and the machines will make the sector, lead the sector to be taken over by the men. And so could you perhaps talk a bit more about the socioeconomic risks for women? And then I will ask you to talk a bit about the advantages that the small scale miners can obtain from these technologies. But the issue of gender is very interesting to us. Indeed, Isabelle, what we have observed is that the introduction of these machines leads to a drop in the number of women who are employed, because one machine, as I mentioned, can replace a minimum of 20 to 30 women. And so when we have mechanization, we're seeing a reduction of the number of women who can be employed. But perhaps we need to look at this differently and manage to organize the women so that they still have the resources, so that they will have the resources to buy these machines. So that's the whole issue, because the financial power is often in male hands. So we need to ensure that the women have the resources to buy these machines that cost a lot of money, but do contribute considerably to processing the ore. So the other part of the question, small mining sector has been improving its performance considerably thanks to machinery. And so the use of metal detectors means that they can detect the slightest trace of the ore, and they're increasing the surface area of their mines. Mining research is becoming increasingly sophisticated and efficient. So in terms of advantages also, I should say that the improvement in the prospection techniques has contributed to an increase in production. We now have 800 sites and production is continuously increasing. And so there's the mechanization, but there's also the fact that we have improved our techniques, our prospection techniques, so we can open up more mining sites. So in terms of operations, we're witnessing an increase in the quantity of ore extracted. And with manual processes, you can't increase the amount of the amount of ore that's being extracted, but the machinery has enabled us to increase the quantity of ore that's mined. So there's an increase in productivity with the use of crushers, so that the ore can be identified in harder and harder, extracted from harder and harder rocks. So this improves profitability. Also the possibility of working less rich seams or deposits. And so thanks to technology, we're increasing the income of operators, and perhaps for women as well, provided that we can help the women to move into more mechanized sectors. And so in terms of the environment, informal mining operations are criticized as being detrimental to the environment because we have some areas that are reserved. We have some forests that are being invaded by the miners, and even some community facilities like schools that are sometimes destroyed for new mines. And so this needs to be carefully controlled, and sometimes we need to bring in punishment for people, and we have to reconcile the need to expand the mining because it reduces unemployment. So the technological innovation in this sector is really an obligation. We also note the setting up of pilot sites where this type of combination will be possible. In mining law, it's prohibited to use certain techniques in informal mining, but now we've set up some pilot sites where they can process their ore when they're organized in cooperatives, so that the ore can be treated in the environment properly. And we also have techniques for processing techniques which are environmentally friendly. There's also the use of systems to prevent landslides and mudslides, and this is very important for the mining industry. So we also have the spacing between the holes, the shafts. So in general, in terms of employment, technical innovations and the introduction of mechanization have led to a loss of employment. But the wealth is giving rise to the development of new roles, such as the prospectors with their equipment, but it's been detrimental to the role of women. And so there are fewer women employed. So we're going to need to find other outlets for these women so that they can benefit from technological change. So Isabelle, this is my answer to the second question. Thank you very much. A little bit later on, we're going to talk about developing a framework, a legal framework. There's a lot being done. Just before that, to close on the economic issue, you were talking earlier about all these machines. We could also talk about business opportunities for local equipment manufacturers and importers in the value chain. What's the case in Burkina? Where does the equipment come from? And what's the local industry's position in this field? It's true with mechanization, the gradual mechanization we're witnessing, that the equipment suppliers started by importing all the equipment from China, mainly from China, and so the equipment is mostly imported. But once you have the equipment, we now have lots of spare parts that we need to import every time there's a problem. So every year there are spare parts imported from these two countries. So the equipment suppliers have realized that the imported spare parts could be manufactured locally. So we're seeing the emergence of small and medium enterprises that are manufacturing the spare parts. And what's important is that it's cheaper, and it also means that these spare parts can be adapted to the needs of the miners. And so this is very good for innovation and the manufacturing of parts for this equipment. So we feel that 60% of the equipment used is imported. And so there's an opportunity for some smaller companies to invest either in the production of equipment itself or investing fully in the operation of small mines. So if I can summarize, we're seeing the emergence of small industrial mines, small-scale industrial mines on a local level with equipment that's to a certain extent manufactured locally, which can lead us to think that in the next few years, there will be increasing development of technology in your country. Well, indeed, as I said, if you come to certain small-scale mines, the name Informal is just a name. If you look at the equipment on the site, so beyond the bulldozers, you have some crushers and accessories, especially the accessories that are manufactured locally. And we have people who have started working on this equipment. So perhaps to conclude, how do you feel about the prospects of the mining policy? And you talked about the mining law and control systems. What would be your three main recommendations to the decision makers who are listening today? Well, I should say that the mining sector in Burkina Faso has developed very rapidly in recent years. And this is due not only to the global price of gold, but also reforms that were undertaken over the last 3 or 4 years. The sector has gone through more reforms than it had done since independence, right through to around 2015 or 2013-14. So it's been a huge change with many reforms. And what I can also say is that this sector is most affected by COVID-19. The performance remains satisfactory thanks to forward planning and innovation. And this has enabled the state to receive quite a lot of tax income and to handle other expenses. But we must see the forest for the trees. It's created an environment, a good environment for the integration of mining to the economy. It shouldn't be just a small prosperous sector, but it should be considered as a major contributor to the entire economy. And so we're working to meet this demand with a local offer, both in terms of high quality and quantity. And so we're developing a strategy for local development so that we have every possibility to integrate mining fully into the economy. So the use of technology in the mining sector is an opportunity for the country, but it's up to us to prepare ourselves to develop the mining system so as not to be surprised by developments. And for this, I think there are quite good prospects that we have and recommendations we made in our document. And perhaps the participants will have the opportunity to read our document. But initially, we need to cultivate transparency in terms of the plan for adopting future technologies. We must encourage mining companies to show in their studies the types of employment they're looking for, the kinds of jobs they're offering, depending on the types of technology they use. And on our level, and also in the National Mining Council, we need to look into the time taken to adopt new technologies and how this can be assisted by the Commission. And we also need to provide training and develop skills. And on this level, we need to encourage the mining industry to plan ahead for changes and develop training and retraining plans so that the employees can be trained into the new jobs that will be developed. And so we're also looking at setting up a mining college, which will focus on future new jobs, particularly linked to the automation and computerization, etc. So we'll be exchanging the small jobs for jobs that will contribute to the control of the small mining operations. We need to make the mine operators aware that they should be involved in the conversion from informal to a formal mining sector. We need to be working on small productive mines and also enhance the skills of the people and make sure that they update skills when they're becoming out of date. We have certain skills that, for example, in Niger, ICMM, they don't need certain cables, and these cables need to be redeployed somewhere, or managers, I think. And so we also need to work in favor of women, the work of women, and get women to organize cooperatives, for example. And these cooperatives need to offer services that are required so that the women can learn the skills and learn to operate the machines we talked about. For the crushing and washing operations, we need to train women so that they can use these systems. And so, Isabelle, we have a lot of recommendations and good prospects, but in view of the time, perhaps I should stop there. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, your report will be published in the next few weeks. And as we've seen, we'll say to the people who are listening that you were talking earlier about different types of jobs which require different skills. And you've given us a good mapping which explains the types of jobs that are at risk and the more specific jobs, and there are more general jobs that may be at risk, and people who can be perhaps redeployed elsewhere. So it's an extremely interesting and useful report, and it's a pity that in half an hour we can't talk about everything, but thank you very much for your contribution. Despite the technological issues we've had, I think we heard you very well, and I don't think there were too many problems with the interpreting and our listeners. So as soon as your report is online, we shall inform all our members, and I hope that we'll be able to hear from you the next time for a longer discussion, because you certainly highlighted some very important points in your report. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you very much.
I think we are coming to the closing part, so I hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Isabelle. And personally, I thought we saw some good technological innovation in play there. The switch to phone WhatsApp connection through the interpretation into Zoom is, for me, innovative. I haven't seen it before, and it seemed to work out well. So I'm happy we were able to hear from Moïse on that. Listen, it's been a really rich discussion. I would be crazy to try to summarize it in a few words, but I think let me talk a little bit about going forward and then bring things together. The expert we just heard from was an author of one of the country case studies. So we've just released the final report of the New Tech New Deal project. I'm going to put for everybody a link to that report in the chat. You can go there and find it. We will also have, again with the support of GIZ, a series of country reports coming out over the next month. Reports that contributed richly to the final report, the main report, including the report from Burkina Faso, from Democratic Republic of Congo, from Mongolia, from Chile and the Andean region, and a report to come out later from South Africa, each looking at the specific realities of new technology, its impacts, its potentials in those countries. So stay tuned for those reports as they come out. To wrap up this session, I think the bottom line take home, and it's quite clear, is that to start with, change is coming, and it's a transformative change that will see the mining sector operate in ways that it does not currently operate. And there are benefits to that, and there are risks to that. And I think the report does, the attempt we've done in the report is to try to identify those places in which we can exploit those opportunities and minimize those risks. And the three areas we looked at today offer us a good glimpse into the complexities that entails in three specific areas: in the area of skills and the types of skills needed by employees to take the jobs of the future, in the areas of artisanal and small scale mining and what those kinds of impacts mean, because they are very different impacts than those that will entail in the large scale mining sector, in the area of using new technologies as a solution to the problem. And we saw the really interesting example of data provided for community resilience in Chile. And then the underlying current, the cross-cutting issue, what these impacts might mean for women in mining, for marginalized communities in mining. So this is a snapshot, a glimpse. I encourage you to look at the main report for the kind of depth that we go into on those and other issues. And to stay tuned, because as Isabelle said earlier, this is the end of this particular project. We're delivering a report, but it's certainly not the end of our work in this area or the work of our partners going forward. We will continue to work on these questions, these issues, and with our mandate to advise our member governments and others, we will have more coming in this space. Let me thank all the participants then for a really rich discussion, all the presenters, and of course the interpreters who did a tough job, but an admirable job in a technical discussion, and also the participants for sticking with us as long as you have. I hope you found the session as enjoyable as I did. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in future.